One thing I've realized as I continue to do these videos is that the more movies there are released in a year, the harder it is to gauge how good of a year it was for animation. I would personally say this year was fantastic, and while it still can't hold a candle to 2009, and maybe 2022 gives it a run for its money, this might become a historic year in animation, with most of the films nominated for and winning major awards being of vastly different styles and genres. Though no new Princess Principal movie this year, which is both a first for this decade and a massive shame. But there were a fair share of stinkers this year, most of all the obvious last placer. Even if I am no devotee to the original Megamind, I can't escape the fact that its TV sequel, Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, is one of the most atrocious excuses of a follow-up I have ever seen. From its complete lack of humor, to its character assassination, to the janky animation, to the stupid kid who has become one of my least favorite characters. Its only consolation is that I had more fun with this than Buck Wild and even Ocean Waves, my least favorite movie ever. But without a doubt, this is my least favorite movie of 2024.
This old Ruby Rider is Ruby riding no more.
The very fact that the Sandy Cheeks movie was leaked in its entirety shows how little anyone cared about it. The only good part of the movie was Ilya's character, who appears very sparingly. Otherwise, it's got super basic animation that a college sophomore could achieve with source filmmaker, and it is not funny at all. I can't pretend to be excited for the upcoming Plankton movie. To my knowledge, Warrior King is a donghua adaptation of the Epic of Gisar, which originated somewhere in Central Asia, with the movie following Gisar as he is banished from his village and tries to find a cure for his dying mother, I think? Because I had no idea what was going on while watching this movie, and otherwise I pretty much disliked every character, especially this girl who straight up betrays the main character and years later breezes past that like it never happened. While the designs and 2D 3D hybrid art are interesting in concept, the final animation comes off more like a crappy scam mobile game. The only saving grace is that the English dub has, hands down, the most hilariously bad performances I've ever heard, to the point where it's kind of funny. It's honestly worth watching on Tubi just for that.
One home to be a unicorn, a magical mythical horse.
Think of the most generic biopic movie. An understated indie band finally makes it big, they get a contract with an old retired producer, the main vocalist breaks away from the band to pursue a more greedy and corporate path with a materialistic modern producer, and eventually they get back together because I just needed to learn to be my true self. That is essentially what Thelma the Unicorn is, except it's about a pony instead of a real person. It pretty much never gets any further than that. Dragon Keeper falls in line with Warrior King as a bad donghua movie that is unintentionally funny at certain points, except with slightly better animation and certainly more likable characters, with a protagonist who is kind of fun to follow. Its story, however, is incredibly disjointed and not super interesting, so it's not like it's a massive improvement.
Miranda Cosgrove, you got me just like why? Miranda Cosgrove, you got me just like why?
Oh boy, we're back to terrible Illumination movies. Don't you just love having 7 different subplots crammed in together where none of the characters have a significant change at all? First, we have Gru doing villain things with this random kid, we have Lucy with her hairdresser cover-up, we have Margot at school, we have Gru's tennis match with his neighbor, we have karate stuff, the Mega Minions, and the villains who don't do anything. They even went back to the migraine-inducing 60 FPS motion blur animation. That's how you know this movie was a personal attack on me.
If you saw a movie that was like real life, you'd be like, what the hell was that movie about? It was really all over the place. Life doesn't make narrative sense.
I am officially done with the SMG4 movies. They were a nice idea at the start with Meggy's Destiny, but gradually it's become clear that these are just glorified TV specials for arcs that are getting increasingly less interesting by the years. And Puzzle Vision is easily the worst out of all of them. It's just 40 minutes of the cast messing around in a TV dimension while Mario goes off doing his own thing, and by the end, nobody changes as a person. There is no reason for this to exist other than a couple of funny gags, as well as slightly clever references to phenomenons of TV, and given his multiple arcs worth of build-up, it's a little ridiculous that Mr. Puzzles is not in the slightest bit funny nor threatening. His villain son, while catchy, is lyrically a snoozer. Legitimately, I'm having a hard time determining if it's better or worse than This Is the Thanks I Get. His whole motivation is, I just wanted to make a TV show. And then he comes back, negating everything that happened in this movie. And throughout watching this, even if I was having a little fun here and there, it gave me an icky feeling as this came out around the time Celeste was fired and replaced from her role as Tari without even being notified. And they still have not made a statement beyond, oh, we're sorry, we forgot. You don't just forget someone who is arguably the entire reason your studio is a success. I'm still gonna keep up with Digital Circus, Gaslight District, and Guinevere as they are made by people unrelated to Glitch's history, but as of after this movie, I am officially done with SMG4 entirely.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
Orion in the Dark was the first movie I watched this year, and while it is certainly cute and has merit, I can't say that I was a huge fan. Its concept of literal darkness taking a kid around the world is interesting, especially in the last act when it deals with some thought-provoking and existential ideas, though I couldn't tell you anything about the characters apart from Dark being sometimes entertaining. The animation looks fine in some shots, but some of the designs and movements look awkward and like they were meant for TV, and I honestly hated the cutaways to future Orion. They quite literally took me out of the story. Yeah, this wasn't really my cup of tea, but as an experimental entry from DreamWorks, I respect it. I said my piece on the Garfield movie in my own video, and not a single one of my thoughts has changed. This is like if you took a random script for a talking animal movie you had on file and substituted Garfield in for the sake of money and advertising.
Is the eye of the tiger, is the thrill of the fight, rising up to the challenge of a rival.
The Tiger's Apprentice has had a rough journey, having to cycle through various studios like Cartoon Network and Paramount, being delayed many a time due to the pandemic, and having the staff and animators overworked to the point where some claim it as the low point of their careers. So I guess I have to add this to my ever-growing worst production history list. Allegedly, the executives wanted this to be along the lines of Spider-Verse, which I can kind of see in its action and animation, but to say that they are similar in any capacity would be a lie, and the story is a big mess. If you want a story about a bullied teen who acquires powers and has to take on training to defeat a demon after their grandmother's death, you can honestly just watch Gentry Chow vs. the Underworld on Netflix as a substitute.
That's right, I heard the story over and over again.
I'm gonna describe a movie, and your job is to guess what movie I'm talking about. After putting out an instant classic in the Disney Pantheon, Disney greenlit a TV show based on the movie, and eventually realized they would make more money if they stitched their first 3 episodes into a glorified zombie of a quote-unquote film, and to no one's surprise, it succeeds at being horribly unmemorable. If you thought I was talking about Atlantis Milo's Return, or Tarzan and Jane, or Belle's Magical World, you're wrong. I was actually talking about Moana 2, which is pretty much on the same level of quality. Okay, that's definitely harsh, since there is noticeably more effort to give it theatrical polish, but you can clearly tell when the episodes were supposed to start and end, and the songs are unmemorable at best. That's really the biggest takeaway. The original Moana has become a tremendous icon in the Disney canon. Moana 2, however, unmemorable. There are definitely things to like about Kung Fu Panda 4, like if we were to remove the context of every movie that came before it, it's actually kind of decent, but as an entry to the franchise, it does so little that I struggle to really call it anything above mediocre. I guess the best way to put it is that it's a fine enough time that when it's over, leaves you with a terrible aftertaste. These two movies are pretty similar in theme and around the same level of quality, so I decided to lump the two together. They Shot the Piano Player is an animated mockumentary following literally Jeff Goldblum as he tries to uncover what happened to a samba jazz pianist named Tenario in Buenos Aires. You can probably guess from the title. It being by the creators of Chico and Rita, it is a visually dazzling film, especially whenever the music kicks in, giving it a vibrant feel and atmosphere. And interestingly, most of the interviews aren't so focused on what happened to Tenario, rather Tenario's influence and the kind of person he was, which is impactful in its own right. That might have been why I liked it more than most though, because as something documentary-like, it's really not that good, as the movie has a tendency to run circles around information and repeat itself. It is pretty frustrating at times. Eternal Spring has an almost opposite issue, where the information accumulates naturally, but in this case at a much slower pace. It intercuts live action footage and only uses animation as a means to recount what happened when Falun Gong was banned in China during the childhood of comic artist Da Xiong. Please tell me if I pronounced any of that wrong. It has a good theme of looking back at traumatic events, learning more about them, and gaining a new perspective. It's just too slow for my liking, and honestly, not that informative about what exactly Falun Gong is, so I couldn't really connect to that all that much.
Have no fear, love reigns here.
Puffin Rockin' New Friends is a movie event based on the Irish animated series Puffin Rock, and I really only watched it for two reasons: Cartoon Saloon and Eva Whittaker. As always, she gives a good performance, and a surprisingly harrowing one at that, as the movie deals with her character and her family migrating to Puffin Rock after a storm wiped their home out. For the most part, it's pretty tedious, but also pretty charming at points. I can totally see a kid loving the heck out of this. Easily my least favorite Cartoon Saloon entry, but what can you do? I hate John Lasseter. With that said, Spellbound was okay. It's an improvement over Skydance's last movie, Luck, with some decent songs, Rachel Zegler having a good voice performance, even though I hear from my friends that she's kind of an annoying person, and the story having a shockingly compelling twist regarding the protagonist's inner conflict. However, I cannot name any of the songs and their melodies from the top of my head. The dumb little sidekick eats up so much time with a song that serves no purpose in the narrative, and the actual adventure is not really interesting, but still a better time to follow than Luck.
Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun.
Out of the Annie Awards nominees for Independent Feature, Mars Express is easily my least favorite. I don't really have a least favorite genre, but if I did, it would absolutely be crime thriller, and Mars Express is certainly one of them. It does have an interesting sci-fi world where planet conquest is the norm and robots are oppressed, but for some reason that concept didn't gel with me personally. I have yet to figure out why. I do think the ending is a neat twist in theory, but it does feel like a cop-out and like the creators ran out of time.
A whole new world, a new fantastic point of view.
For anyone looking at the Imaginary thinking it's a Ghibli ripoff, you wouldn't be too far off. Studio Ponoc was initially founded with a bunch of Ghibli alumni, putting out Marion the Witch's Flower and Modest Heroes, both of which I thought were okay, but nothing special. The Imaginary follows an imaginary friend whose human friend falls into a coma, navigating a world of imaginary friends to reunite with her while being pursued by a creepy old man who feasts on imaginary friends to preserve his youth. Though I honestly thought that part of the movie could have been its own thing, or even the subplot with the mother and her imaginary friend, since the narrative as is honestly a big mess with a ton of conflicting narrative signals, but the magical elements are certainly a lot of fun. I have been waiting for Abruptio for years. The concept of a psychological horror film made with puppets is a fascinating concept, which does feel wasted on a story that feels really messy with some elements that feel like they don't need to be there, specifically towards the end, but it is much appreciated as it utilizes the uncanny nature of the medium to create an intentionally confusing experience and instill a feeling of underlying dread. I appreciate the craft more than I do the plot, but the craft alone makes the experience completely worth it.
Last Christmas, I gave you my heart, but the very next day, you gave it away.
After Ron's Gone Ron, for some reason Locksmith decided to put out a Christmas movie as their second film, which I don't really mind because I like this more than Ron's Gone Ron. This is an anthology movie following 3 stories, one about a lonely kid connecting with his equally lonely strict teacher, another about the relationship between twin sisters who are entirely different people, and the last about a group of kids doing whatever they want while at home alone. I find that I connected more with the first 2 stories, which is a shame since it ends on the last story, which I didn't really care for, making the finale where all the stories converge kind of a slog. Still, I appreciate the holiday sentiment. Kensuke's Kingdom follows Michael getting stranded on a remote island after a storm hits his family's boat, and he meets an old Japanese man named Kensuke and learns from him many ways to survive and the beauty of nature and life. The story is slight with a quiet and atmospheric vibe, and Kensuke's backstory is shocking. I did not expect them to go there, but for the most part this comes off as a less good flow.
Hello, it's so good to see you. Met before, but nice to meet you. I don't really wanna be like,
The Peasants was the first of many independent movies this year that I was lucky enough to see in local theaters, and I picked a damn good one to start with. It was a marvel to see this on the big screen, as its acrylic painted animation emulating various European paintings makes for a gorgeous and ethereal watching experience. The film follows Yagna as her beauty, affair, and marital status lead to her becoming an object of desire and frustration for the entire village. Essentially, you're just watching her life fall apart for 2 hours. I initially loved the story, but over time, the unlikability of the townspeople, and especially Antek, really rubbed me the wrong way, reminding me way too much of The Crucible, where I also disliked every character except one of the leads. And while I've still yet to watch Loving Vincent, I do agree that this doesn't quite take advantage of the medium like that movie. Though I do think this movie is really good, especially in regards to its phenomenal ending. And one thing I have always appreciated is that while the story deals with a woman trying to break free of being treated as an object, mostly in a sexual way, unlike some of my least favorite movies like Belladonna of Sadness and Kite, The Peasants does not male gaze its way around the main character's body. That is the bare minimum of these kinds of stories, and it baffles me that a high percentage of them don't even clear this line. I've never cared much for anything Transformers related, but I did think Transformers 1 was pretty good. I recognize how much of an accomplishment it is that it's fully animated and stars the actual Transformers for once. However, it's a movie I respect more than I really like, as it still falls into some traps of celebrity humor and on-the-nose dialogue. Similar to Transformers 1, I've never watched anything Ultraman, but I did have a good time with this, even with a standard story and some unfunny humor, as well as not being a huge fan of kaiju fights because of how slow they can be. The animation alone is gorgeous enough to make the experience worth it, and the characters are fun to follow. The best I can describe Ghost Cat Anzu is Garfield movie, but make it anime, and better, and instead of journeying to a factory, the main characters take a journey to hell. I can certainly say Anzu and Karin have a pretty great and wholesome dynamic, and the animation is absolutely incredibly pretty as well as cutesy, which seems to be a staple of the studio that animated the 2005 run of Doraemon. However, the emotional core and story of the movie was a little hard to really decipher. Still, it's cute, it's charming, it's pleasing to the eye, and it's a lot of fun. I've generally liked all of Studio Colorido's films, and My Oni Girl follows suit with their trend of ordinary kids coming into contact with the fantastical and approaching it in a nonchalant manner. This time with a boy who encounters an Oni and tries to help her find her mother. It looks really pretty and certainly is one of the better iterations of the extrovert girl, ex-introvert guy tropes, but this is my least favorite of Colorido's, mainly because I had a lot of fun following the main two before they suddenly got separated due to petty drama in the second half. Nonetheless, this movie is really, really good. I have never seen the original Mononoke series, but that didn't stop me from having a lot of fun with Phantom in the Rain, as it is a standalone story in the same universe. Two women enter the Roku to accomplish entirely different goals, where one of them becomes an outlet for frustration and jealousy of the other woman. Sometime later, a spirit comes along and kills said jealous woman, forcing the two girls, two warriors, and an occult medicine seller to find a way to seal the spirit. It is undeniably an insanely beautiful movie, especially when the action kicks in with the medicine seller being the most badass character ever. Certainly there's commentary on the treatment of women at the time, but that is also kind of my problem with the movie, as it leads in with the tone of a psychological thriller before shifting to psychedelic fever dream-esque. And while I greatly appreciate fever dream movies, it did mean that some of the character arcs and plot points were left unresolved, which does make more sense when you consider this is actually the first in a planned trilogy of Mononoke movies.
Let the blood inside you flow. Find the way to the unknown. Yeah, trust yourself and let it go.
Little disclaimer, from this point on, if you were to claim any of these movies to be your favorite of the year, I would not even argue with you, which just goes to show how incredible this year was for animation. I bring this up because it cannot be overstated how much of a joy it was to see Flow win the Golden Globes and the Oscars. I thought Away was just okay, but Flow is a vast improvement with incredible environmental storytelling and dialogueless scenes about a cat, a capybara, a secretary bird, a dog, and a lemur navigating a flooded world with only a boat. It is beautiful to a T, and you can tell that the director was a cat owner from how the cat moves and emotes.
Break, break, break my heart again. Feels like it's time to start again. Yeah, I'll be okay. Yeah, forget my name.
The Summer is a South Korean animated film about the romance between two girls throughout high school up until adulthood, and the struggles and roadblocks they run into in their relationship. And it is a rough movie, delving into how badly these two want to be together, but their communication issues eat away at their hearts, eventually ending in heartbreak. The actual story is admittedly pretty slow, but it does pick up as the red flags accumulate, largely in their adulthood. In execution, it kind of reminds me of Frag Time, where it's not really anything amazing until the last 10 or so minutes, but it's still very effective at bringing up very harrowing and realistic topics regarding the nature of relationships. From the creators of Mary and Max, Memoir of a Snail has the main character Sarah recount the events of her life up until her best friend's passing, which largely consists of her immense separation anxiety from her brother at a young age after their father passed. Already you can tell it is a visually stunning film with its grimy and detailed stop motion selling the darkness, the sadness, as well as the quirkiness of each of its scenes. People may have connected more with the emotional weight, but I found myself connecting more with the comedy comedy, which is incredibly strong. As for why it's not higher, I felt like the movie just kept going, and when it finally reached the ending, I had mixed thoughts on said ending. Nonetheless, I'm glad this is in the discussion for one of the best films of 2024.
All hail Shadow, heroes rise again.
Well, we finally got our theatrical adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2, and this might be my favorite of the trilogy so far, as Maria is far and away my favorite Sonic character, and I think they treated the tragedy of her story very well. Shadow is probably in my top 3 Sonic characters, and I think he has also done justice, as Keanu gives a stellar performance and the writing sells his thirst for revenge 1-to-1 to Adventure 2. I do think there are glaring plot holes, even more so than the previous movies, and the Robotniks get way too wacky sometimes. Like, I remember when Live and Learn first came up and then it immediately shifted to Gerald spanking Eggman, and I was instantly recoiling. Otherwise, this is a great film, and a good complement to Shadow Generations, which I'll admit I had a better time with. And I can already sense the comments from last time. Guys, Sonic 3 is a great movie. Just because it's somewhere in the middle of the video doesn't mean it's actually mid.
Just the 5 of us, we can make it if we try, but each day that passes by is tearing pages from my mind.
This is probably my biggest cheat since Hello World, because while this movie came out in 2022 initially and was released on demand in 2023, it came out on Netflix in 2024, which is why I went ahead and cheated and put it on this list. By that logic, if I didn't see Suzume in theaters, I probably would have saved it for this year's list as well. All that to say, my list, my rules. Quintessential Quintuplets is possibly one of the most popular modern romance anime alongside Love is War, as it toys with the harem anime formula by having all of the potential partners be sisters. But while there is certainly some humor and cute moments to be had, it doesn't do a whole lot for me personally, especially since the beginning of the show is deeply unpleasant, with 4 out of the 5 sisters hating the MC's guts for no reason, and the MC is just boring as plaster. The movie, however, is shockingly really great. It serves as the finale to the series as a whole, where we follow each of the characters in their separate bite-sized stories taking place during the school festival, where we tie up loose ends concerning character arcs and family matters, and find out which of the girl pals will upgrade to girlfriend. And aside from Ichika's story, which doesn't have a whole lot going for it, all of the other vignettes are a lot of fun to sit through, and Yotsuba has become my favorite character out of the entire cast, which is probably why I liked this movie more than most, and mainly because I already knew who would be picked. Because if this series has a single issue, it is absolutely screen time priority. A lot of the major developments of the story revolve around either Miku or Nino and leave pretty much everyone else with scraps of comedic chops. Still, I'm able to wave those issues aside to properly enjoy this movie, especially its final 15 minutes, which deeply resonated with me.
At the end of the world, or the last thing I see, you are never coming home, never coming home. Good night, should I?
This year, we've seen history be made with Pakistan's first animated movie, The Glass Worker. Or rather, we would have seen history be made if GKIDS or any other distributor bothered to pick it up for a wide release. You can definitely see the Ghibli inspiration, and you may be tempted to call it a Ghibli ripoff, but this is much more than that. It has a layered and fascinating story about how war changes people's perspectives on life, how war diminishes the lives of others, and how people can grow desensitized to it. It condemns war in favor of art that carries human emotion throughout history, which is a powerful sentiment in this day and age. And part of why I think it's not been picked up yet, because people are cowards. Not to mention, it is a beautiful spectacle with some incredible music. However, I failed to fully connect to this movie. I can't call any of the characters standouts of the year, particularly the lead. There are some plot points, mainly regarding the magic, that go unresolved, and honestly, the ending sucks. I'm sorry. I disliked a lot of things about how the movie ended. Even with that, however, I'm glad I could watch it, but I do wish that more people could simply be able to see it, which as of writing this, seems extremely unlikely. Coming from someone who has never watched a single second of Lord of the Rings, I was surprised at how much I loved War of the Rohirrim. Well, loved might be an overstatement. I didn't really care for the first half of the movie, as it just felt like your typical okay war movie. But as it went along, I just fell in love with the story and the world, the inner and interpersonal conflicts, the battle, the fights. A lot of this is incredible, and Hera has become one of my favorite female protagonists pretty quickly. I still think she's trapped in a B+ movie at best, but this is really great. Like the moment when she steps onto the battlefield with a disheveled wedding dress on is badass.
It's gonna shelter us from the wind, the wind, the wind.
Sirocco in the Kingdom of Winds is proof that just because your movie is made exclusively for kids doesn't mean it can't be great in its own right. The movie follows two kids as they journey into a world created by their book author neighbor, and they try to find a way back home in the midst of dealing with frog people, concerts, and a mystery regarding a man who can allegedly control the wind. And yet, this being for kids is not a detriment, because rather than dumb things down and treat kids like they're stupid, this movie instead creates an unforgettable and whimsical experience that any child, and honestly any adult, can fall in love with. It's not one of my personal favorites, but it's commendable for that quality alone.
We live in an in-between universe where things change, alright, but according to patterns, rules, or as we call them.
I know practically nothing about Pharrell Williams, but otherwise I had so much fun learning about and connecting with the story of his life. The Lego animation brings life to so many hilarious jokes and situations, as well as extremely colorful sequences, as Pharrell has synesthesia. The music is incredible, unsurprisingly, and it was eye-opening to see just how many songs Pharrell actually worked on unbeknownst to me. Piece by Piece is just incredible all around, and probably one of my favorite documentaries now. I am glad to learn that Aardman isn't shutting down after all, but even if they were, Vengeance Most Foul would be a damn good movie to go out on. It has the usual funny shtick of Wallace and Gromit doing their usual Wallace and Gromit shenanigans, while Feathers McGraw is in the background planning his escape. And I believe this is a sequel to The Ron Trousers, which I'll admit I've not watched. I do like Curse of the Were-Rabbit more than this, however, since Wallace has a tendency to take Gromit for granted a lot in this one, but it is still a fun time with stellar claymation. Chicken for Linda is a colorful French animated film about a mom and her daughter acquiring a chicken, and it just gets bigger from there. It's cute, it's hectic, it's hella entertaining, it is beautiful to a T from an animation and music standpoint, it's funny, and it has a couple of emotional layers to it. Iti Mapagpagkal, or The Missing, was one that I was really looking forward to this year, as it is a Filipino animated film and was the highest recommendation of the animation Discord server I'm a part of, and I get why. The movie has a beautiful and almost personal vibe in its rotoscope animation, occasionally jumping into 2D animated flashbacks that have a sense of childlike wonder in them, which juxtaposes the incredibly disturbing nature of the story. It follows a young, literally mouthless animator who is being pursued by aliens after his uncle's death, which prompts him to remember traumatizing experiences he had regarding his uncle. Despite how fun it can be and how wholesome it is sometimes, it deals with the subject of SA trauma in a very mature way, and thankfully does it tastefully. I usually have a really hard time with these kinds of stories precisely because of how they skirt around, and especially concerning female victims, male gaze their way around the subject matter, but this hit me on a deeply emotional level, especially concerning this is based on the director's own personal experiences. And you know you've crafted something truly spectacular if you can get the audience to gasp at the sight of an entirely different person who also doesn't have their mouth. The ending may leave a bit more to be desired, but this is one of the most deeply affecting films of the year, as well as disturbing. It was a genuine shock to see how close Inside Out 2 matched the original's quality. It's just as funny, it's just as, if not more, visually stunning, and Riley's parts are still my favorite bits of each movie, as she is one of the most well-written kid characters. I will say, while the emotional core of anxiety and its role in our lives is certainly more complex than one, I wouldn't say it's as tightly written, with an ending that, while beautiful, might not gel with everyone on the planet. But I'm glad we got this in 2025's Elio, because I don't think Pixar's future is looking too bright.
Do you remember 21st night, September? Love was changing the mind.
I missed Robot Dreams last year, but I'm glad I was able to put it on this year's list. Robot Dreams is a completely dialogueless film about the friendship between a dog and a robot that goes down an existential path that eventually ends very past lives-like. I can't say it eviscerated my heart like everyone else, as the pacing was a bit too slow for my liking, but I was thoroughly engaged in how this predicament would all unfold. It doesn't quite hit past lives or 5 centimeters per second for me, but I am glad this got as popular as it did. It's an incredible movie. Blue Giant is another movie I missed last year, and I am shocked at how incredible it is. A story about an aspiring jazz musician who teams up with his friend and an upstart jazz pianist to become the best jazz band in Tokyo. The characters are likable enough and have their moments of entertaining banter as well as deeply compelling drama, to the point where I was genuinely crying by the end. But I don't think I have ever been this engrossed in a collection of musical performances since Sound Euphonium. The occasional CG animation might be hit or miss with people, but it is on when those performances hit with its psychedelic imagery, as well as the music being just phenomenal. It is an incredible triumph in musical anime that I cannot recommend enough.
It's a beautiful, delightful day, and I'm feeling A-okay. Is there something I can help you with today?
It really took me by surprise how much I loved The Concierge. Based on the manga titled The Concierge at Hokkyoku Department Store, Akino is a newly hired concierge at a mall catered towards anthropomorphic extinct animals who tries her best to help every customer she comes across. And that's just the plot, a simple story about a girl running around doing her best. One of my favorite kinds of stories, period, is seeing a wholesome character downplay their own abilities when in reality their compassion and kindness is their greatest strength that makes them stand above all the rest, which is equal parts empowering and emotional, and you definitely get a lot of that here, as Akino is a great protagonist to follow. And between that and the cutesy, bouncy animation that gives me sweet serotonin, I watched this before seeing The Colors Within, so at the time this was the happiest I've been watching a movie in months. It is definitely a comfort movie I recommend to everyone. I was unable to make a separate video for Wild Robot since I was working on my 2008 video at the time, which still have not released, sorry about that. Otherwise, Wild Robot is unsurprisingly one of the best films of the year, and probably the best mainstream animated film of the year. Based on the book of the same name, the film follows Roz, a helper robot stranded on a remote island as she tries to survive under the cruelty of nature while raising a gosling as her own child, with the help of a fox voiced by Pedro Pascal. The animation is absolutely gorgeous, emulating the 2D 3D style in a way that reads like a picture book similar to Nimona, and in ways it looks better than Nimona, being reliant on various shots of the characters taking in the natural world around them. I think Fink is a really strong character who feels like a random individual who becomes a family friend and eventually becomes a second parent out of want and circumstance. And Roz herself is a compelling protagonist, grappling with her own programming and what it means to be a mother. And that is this movie's biggest strength and what makes it stand out more than any other mainstream animated film that I can think of. In some ways, it reminds me of Maquia, one of my top 5 films of all time. And let me just say, it is a big freaking deal when a family film reminds me of one of my top 5 movies. It almost feels like a mashup of Maquia and WALL-E, which does make it a tad disappointing when it's not nearly as good as either, given how the ending is a little lackluster. Like when Roz says, "I am a wild robot," it's like all the tension deflates hilariously. That might have to do with the fact that the movie actually adapts the first and parts of the second Wild Robot books. But that doesn't change how marvelous this movie is, and it has become one of my top 3 DreamWorks movies alongside Dragons and Prince of Egypt. Spy X Family is one of the most popular anime that I have seen take the world by storm. And while there are funnier comedy anime I enjoy, and it's not even the best spy thriller I've seen, this show is such a blast that I have endless fun with. A story about a spy, an assassin, a psychic kid, and a dog who can see the future forming a fake family for various reasons, one of which being because the spy needs to get closer to a political figurehead through his fake daughter going to a school, with the added twist that Lloyd and Yor do not know each other's true identities, let alone Anya's psychic abilities. And while this show has its moments of beautiful and insane animated sequences, the real hook is seeing the hilarious hijinks of Lloyd and Yor not knowing the true nature of their family, Anya hiding their identities as well as her identity, and also how oddly wholesome it is that precisely because they are a fake family, their love and respect for one another is real, especially from Anya. The Code White movie released this year falls more in line with your typical anime filler movie that doesn't necessarily advance the plot of the show, which is admittedly slightly to its detriment, given how its final act feels like it should be the finale of the whole thing. But even so, it stands far above the rest because of the inherent goofiness and wackiness of the characters, making this one of the most entertaining experiences of the year. And I don't think I have ever seen a movie where its central action-packed conflict relies on whether a character will take a shit. Non Biori Vacation is still my favorite of the filler movie variety, but this is an extremely close second. And while we're on the topic of series movies, I guess we can talk about a few more that I don't want to make separate segments on and discuss where in the list they would be. Dandadan First Encounter, I guess, technically counts as it had a brief theatrical run, except that it's literally just the first 3 episodes, and given how the third one ends, it probably could have added the 4th episode as well. In placement, I'd put it around the summer. Inanimate Insanity decided to have its finale be a movie, except they didn't do that, they just released the episodes regularly, so that was confusing. Overall, it would go somewhere beneath that Christmas. You could technically classify each episode of Kimi ni Todoke Season 3 as their own movie, and they'd all honestly be around Sirocco. And the feature-length premiere of ReZero Season 3 honestly is fantastic enough to be around this spot on the list. Maybe.
You spend half of your life trying to fall behind. You're using your headphones to drown out your mind.
I know very little about Fujimoto apart from Chainsaw Man, which I've still yet to watch, which is why Look Back was not that high on my radar earlier in the year. But I am glad that it lived up to the hype surrounding it because this is one of the most emotional and hard-hitting experiences of the year. A simple story about 2 girls named Fujino and Kyomoto who partner up to draw manga, condensed in only 60 minutes of some of the best wholesomeness, drama, devastation, and uplifting sensation I have ever seen. Out of all the stories I've seen that explore why people create art, this is admittedly on the simpler side, but that's exactly what makes this so effective. At times, you can even see how much of an autobiographical piece this is, as Fujimoto channels what could possibly be conversations he's had with himself through the conversations Fujino and Kyomoto have with each other. Also, the fact that their ship name is literally Fujimoto. Their dynamic is fascinating, as it explores all facets of creativity and the artist's call, from the jealousy manifesting in either giving up on art completely or finding the drive to get better, the joy of collaborating and seeing how far you've come, the pain of losing and maybe forgetting the reason why you create art in the first place, and the determination to carry on with the stories you tell. Those last 2 points especially being hard-hitting when you realize what day the original one-shot was posted on. It is fascinating how much of himself Fujimoto put into this story, which is precisely why it's been able to resonate with literally everyone who's watched it.
I can feel you all around me, thinking me the air, breathing, holding on to what I'm feeling, savoring this perfect feeling.
There are 3 ways to look at this movie: a love letter to and celebration of the artist's call to channel their feelings into music, no matter how inexperienced or amateur they are at the craft. Or a story of people from all walks of life, people who believe in God, who don't believe in God, or who have never heard of God, and yet those people come to know each other so closely in this beautiful tale of healing from your struggles and accepting yourself as you are. Or just a simple, cute story about 3 kids who form a band on a whim to create silly beats, vibing in an isolated church for most of the hour and 40-minute runtime. It's got a sort of Breakfast Club feel to it, though not nearly as heavy in devastation, but also admittedly a lot better. And yet, all 3 of these elements blend together in a magical and ethereal experience that is unmatched by anything I have ever seen. And that's why it deserves the 10 out of 10 from me, because it is such an indescribable experience I know for a fact I will never get anywhere else. I'm hard-pressed to think of a movie more deserving of the comfort movie title than this, as well as, let's face it, best Christian movie. I myself am Christian, and I feel like this is the best depiction of what it truly means to be Christian that we will ever get. As you feel Totsuko's compassion and warmth, never forcing her beliefs onto her friends, but instead just being there for them and trying to reach an understanding so she can best support them with her kindness as a genuine friend. On top of that, the music is outstanding. Naoko Yamada's direction carries over into the stunning art and cinematography, and the dub actors did very well, specifically the main 3, with Eddie Lee's adorable performance, Kylie McNeil having another magnificent musical gig under her belt, and especially Libby Rue's hilarious and bombastic performance as Totsuko. To be honest, this has easily earned its spot in my top 5 movies of all time, and it is absolutely my pick for the best movie of 2024. So 2024 was probably one of the best years for animated films, and as a year overall, it was passably quiet, but 2025 has already proven to be the worst of the 2020s easily, and we are not even 3 months in. I briefly said this in my Colors Within review, but it really does suck, everything that's happening right now. It really feels like every step the US has made to be better has been rapidly reversing, but all we can do is protest, stay informed and educated, and be loudly proud of who we are. At the very least, we have some good animated movies to look forward to in 25, like Elio, Dogman, Neja 2. I've been looking for a few moments of cheers in Trapezium for months, but it looks like I'll have to wait for them a little longer. Naturally, The Lovers, In Waves, and especially K-pop Demon Hunters are on my watch list. The Hatsune Miku movie was acquired by GKIDS and is slated to release in April. Laika's Wildwood will get here eventually, and Mamoru Hosoda has a new movie this year, Scarlet, so I am very excited. So what is your ranking for 2024 animated movies? Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thank you for watching, and catch you next time.